Those are all the returns for today properly shelved. I ought to add a new rule to make sure no one tries shelving the books themselves. It causes much more confusion than what I'm willing to handle. I wonder when I ought to take my afternoon tea. How long has it been since my lunch break? Oh my, who do we have here? It's been so long since you've stopped by the library, little cutie. The knights always talk about how much they see you running around the city, taking jobs and commissions and whatnot each and every day. Whenever I see you dashing this way and that, I can't help but liken you to a busy little bumblebee. So, why have you flown into my corner of the world today? Just to talk to little old me? Oh, your presence always means quite a lot to me, darling. Say, why don't you rest here for a bit? I was just about to take my afternoon tea, but it's always better with company. Or if you would prefer, you can pick out a book and I can read it for you. Any book here is free for you to borrow. It'd be no bother at all. Having you in my library is never a bother. In fact, I'm flattered you would want to spend your free time here. So, what kind of book would fancy your interest? Oh, you'd like me to choose? I'm delighted to hear that you value my input. Then in that case... I know just what to read. Go ahead and make yourself comfortable on the couch. I'll fetch the book right away. Let's see... Fiction, folklore and fairy tales... Perfect. Right where it should be. Here we go. Heart of Clear Springs. A legendary tale passed down by Springvale hunters that portrays an encounter between an unknown young boy and a spring fairy. You're familiar with the legends of the spring fairy, yes? Oh my, you know much more than I thought. But I shouldn't have expected anything less. You are remarkably well-traveled. Yes, the spring fairy is most likely one of the lockfolk that originated from Fontaine and came to settle in the town of Springvale. One must wonder how much of this fairy tale is more than simply a tale. But either way, it makes for a lovely little childhood story to return to every now and again. Sit back, little cutie. You don't have to do anything for the next few minutes. You can simply relax and listen while I read to you. Heart of Clear Springs, Volume 1. Under the cascading moonlight, a tearful boy made his wish at the spring. A fairy from afar who had taken up residence in the unoccupied spring listened in silence to his wordless wish. Spring fairies know nothing of distant memories or deep dreams. They are born of water's essence, faceless descendants of the angels. Thus, when the curious fairy emerged from the water and heard the cry of that boy's heart, she became interested in this life, younger and more fragile than her own. The silent fairy reached out her formless fingers, cold as the midnight dew and soft as fortune forgone, and gently caressed the boy's forehead and cheeks. Startled by the stranger's touch, the young boy lifted his head and met the fairy's gaze. "Can you make my wish come true?" the boy asked. The fairy of the spring was so surprised and confused by this presumptuous question, but she could not speak it, and so simply nodded her head. Satisfied, the boy left. He did not know that the spring fairy was alone, without friends or family, and that she had lost a great deal of her wisdom. Only when the spring water flowed from the cracks in the stone into her pool, and when she gazed upon the fractured image of the moon in its rippling water, did she slowly regain the ability to think, and to mimic fragments of speech. Like a curious child, the fairy observed the world around her in innocence, wonder, and love. She rejoiced with the fox and squirrel who stole berries, and grieved at the dark clouds that covered the horizon. And for the young boy, a feeling complex yet immature welled forth from within her heart. All alone in this world, she had neither the power nor wisdom with which to grant his wish. But she could share it, and she drew life from sharing its burdens. Hey, darling, what do you think so far? Do you like it? I'm glad to hear that. Far too many people dismiss fairy tales like this. It would do them some good to consider what even children's stories can teach them. And what do you think of the boy and the spring fairy? Yes, what a curious bond between these two lonely beings that come from entirely different worlds. How innocent, how naive, and yet what an earnest connection they have. It almost gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling when I read about it. But let's continue. Volume 2. A legendary tale passed down by Springvale hunters that recounts the acquaintance of a spring fairy and a young boy. As he gazed at the fractured image of the moon carried by the water's ripples, the boy poured his heart out to the spring. From within his words, she learned much of him. And from her silence, he strengthened his belief in himself. Dimly, the spring fairy understood that there was good in the world, beyond moonlight and fruits, and more to darkness than mere clouds. The boy spoke to her of forests and trees, cities and walls, and shared with her his joys, his sorrows, and his fears. As she listened to him, she became enamored of this imperfect world into which she had been born. When the boy grew frustrated at his powerlessness, the spring fairy would gently and quietly wipe away his tears. From them, she grew to understand the world outside the spring a little more. Those tears flowed into the water, and the fairy purified them, turning them into sweet nectar that brought him sweet dreams. The boy forgot the pain of his waking hours and met the silent fairy by her spring in his sleep. Every time that happened, the fairy too would smile, asleep in the pool drenched in moonlight. The fresh dew nourished the boy's dreams, and the boy's dreams rejuvenated the lonely fairy's soul. In those dreams, the spring fairy told the boy tales of the faraway realm of Hydro. She spoke of her sapphire blue homeland, she sang the homesickness of exile, and she sighed for separation and belonging. In these dreams, the boy became the one who silently listened, who wept for her troubles, and who rejoiced in her happiness. Over time, the spring fairy gained the power of speech from the boy's memories and dreams. Over time, they became friends who shared all. Did I just see you dozing up there for a second? Don't worry about it at all, little cutie. Don't be afraid to fall asleep if you need to. I'll keep reading for as long as you want me to. You've been working awfully hard recently, haven't you? Do take some time to rest and relax. Work can always come later. For now, all you need to do is close your eyes, relax, and slow your breathing. There we go. Now, where were we? Volume 3. A legendary tale passed down by Springvale hunters that recounts a promise made between a spring fairy and a young boy. When the wind ceased to blow, the moon's fractured reflection in the pool was made whole, and the boy heard the fairy's voice for the first time. Fairies are tender, sensitive beings beyond the ken of humans, and the boy was deeply taken by her gentle, elegiac voice. But fairies being tender and sensitive beyond human ken, through his eyes she saw his naked yearning, and the promise that was about to leave his lips. And suddenly, the fairy was afraid. Mortal lives are strong but fleeting, and the boy must grow, and grow old. Once youth and innocence had faded, how would he treat his elemental descendants? In the twilight of his life, would he blame himself for throwing his life away for a childish promise? The spring fairy was pure and kind, but she did not understand human love. She had never seen the miracle of humanity, and had merely sat idle through millennia of change. And so, she greatly feared parting. What humans see as the miracle of devotion, elemental fairies can only perceive as fleeting pleasure, and even the power of fairies cannot reserve the aging of loved one. The tender fairy could not bear to see that unavoidable day come, and with a kiss, she stopped the boy from uttering the words. But the boy and his innocence mistook her rejection as her approval of his promise. In that moment, the fairy vowed that she would someday bear to leave him, and the boy vowed that he would remain by her spring forever. Little cutie, are you asleep? Can you hear me? Asleep? Good. You really have been working a lot. I could tell when you showed up. I could see how tired you were. Shh, it's okay. You sleep. You can sleep. My little traveler, you shouldn't feel bad at all about resting. You have so much time ahead of you. You don't need to spend all the time working and running. It's nice to relax, to sit and have a cup of tea, to read fairy tales without worrying about what job or commission you plan to take next. Truth be told, a part of me is jealous of all the time you have. The time you can share with those who are the most beloved to you. To us. I try to avoid getting too attached, but I can't bring myself to leave now. And all too soon I'm fated to. I know I must sound terribly selfish when I say this, but if you could entertain the rambling desires of a selfish old lady, please, treasure the time you have. And when I leave them behind, please, treasure them for me. I ought to finish reading. There is just one more chapter. Volume 4. A legendary tale passed down by Springville hunters. Their accounts a bitter ending, finally faced by a boy who's no longer young, and a spring fairy who had not grown old. By and by, the young boy grew up, made new friends, and had new experiences. And the spring fairy, as she had in his youth, sang him her quiet elegies, each one. Till the day came at last when she left, and grazed no more upon the boy. Never again did words flow forth from the trickling sound of the spring. Never again would the fractured moon become whole. The spring fairy suddenly realized that though she had found a place to belong, and though she had experienced fleeting happiness, she was still alone. The boy, now no longer a boy, could not perceive her flight, and blamed himself for his own solitude. Perhaps she was merely a childish fantasy. He would think this to himself as he listened to the gurgling of the spring. But that cool kiss was real, as was the wind that once played with her hair. Suddenly, he realized that though he had met and parted with countless new friends, and though he had adventured and returned more times than he could remember, he was still alone in the end. So, as they had done many years ago, the boy's tears fell into the pure pond, soaking into the fractured moon. But this time, the spring fairy did not come as promised. Stubbornly she turned her back, willing to be the object of an innocent childhood dream, to be a fleeting guest wandering from a foreign land, but unwilling to allow her near eternal life to break her lover's promise. The legend has it that whenever the rain pours down, the raindrops that fall into the pond mix with the tears of the spring fairy. To his dying day, the boy believed wholeheartedly in this grandma's superstition. But sadly, the spring fairy who fled from her true feelings could never believe it herself. The end. Oh, you're still asleep? Maybe I can catch you up to the rest of the story once you wake up. Maybe I'll choose a story with a happier ending. Would you like that, my little traveler? I hope that sometime in the future, you'll come back to hear more fairy tales. How lucky am I to have your company, that you could think of me as a friend. I would happily read more for you, anytime you wish it. Any story you wish for, I would happily tell you. But rest for now. I'll wait until you wake up.